Hello everyone, back tuning in to today's first video. We're doing some more autumn analogues for today's first video. We've got the second autumn 2019 analogues update ahead for you. So today we're looking at May data. We're going to start off with the central England temperature. So we'll be looking at years that had a similar central England temperature to 2019 in May, and what the autumns were like that followed those Mays. And then the second part of the video, have a look at England and Wales precipitation for May, and again we'll have a look at Mays that had similar England and Wales precipitation and the autumns that followed those Mays as well. Got a lot of tabs open, got something like 67 tabs open, so this is going to be a bit of a marathon. Been a while since I've done a real marathon in terms of the analogues updates, but I thought why not combine CET and precipitation data and lay it all on the line for you for this second autumn 2019 analogues update. So that's what we're going to be doing to start us off. Coming up later on today, we'll have the GWV Sunday roundup, so that's going to be quite an interesting review. That'll be with you just after lunch, and then also another update for Le Mans coming up at GWV today as well. I'll say a big thank you to our analogues guru James Ackwill for helping to get all of these analogues together. So as ever, a big thank you to James for bringing it all together for us. Big thank you to Richard Trott for producing our GWV's 2019 autumn updates GIF. I think really setting the scene there with the GIF for the start and end of the video. So thank you to Richard for that. It's going to be quite a long video, so you can't watch it all when going. Don't worry, you will be able to come back to the website and watch a video on demand, and also read the written summary going over everything that we discuss in the video later on today. That'll be up on the autumn updates page sometime this evening, so you'll be able to watch the video on demand, and you may have a read of that written summary. Going to be a long video, as I say. You can see how many tabs we've got to get through here, so it is going to be a long video. Get yourself a comfy chair, get yourself a cup of tea, and some biscuits, maybe some snacks, whatever you like. And we'll proceed with the second autumn 2019 analogues update for you. So we're going to start off with central England temperature. So the CET for May 2019 came out at 11.1. An anomaly of 0.0.0, of 0.0 if you like. So it's bang on average in terms of the 61 to 2010 temperature average. So CT 11.1, that means that our central England temperature range that we're going to be looking at for this video is going to be May CETs from 10.9 to 11.3, and that places May 2019 at 11.1, slap bang in the middle. So our first autumn is the autumn of 1857. This one is following on from that CET range in May of 10.9 to 11.3. So this one with an area of above average heights to the north of the UK. Probably quite an easterly autumn, but I would have thought relatively dry actually. That's a big blocking area of high pressure sitting to the north of the UK, so you'd expect that to be pretty dry. Our next autumn is the autumn of 1871. Remember, this is following the CET range of 10.9 to 11.3 in May. This one has northern blocking to the north of the UK with below average heights over and to the south and east of the UK. This is a much more unsettled and potentially a lot colder autumn as well. There could be some early wintry weather on offer with that, and would also be quite unsettled too in the autumn of 1871. The next autumn is 1884, again following the May CET range of 10.9 to 11.3. This one looks like it's a rather drier autumn. We have above average heights out to the west of the country and below average heights to the south. So it blocked off the Atlantic. It looks like there should be quite a bit of dry weather on offer there in the autumn of 1884. Probably quite cool though. Next autumn is 1903, so quite a gap from that last one through to 1903. This one looks more unsettled, a trough of below average heights almost over the top of the country, so just looks rather westerly this. Maybe a bit of an Atlantic onslaught type autumn in 1903. 1904 comes up next, again following May CET range of 10.9 to 11.3. This is how the autumn of 1904 is looking. A much drier autumn with above average heights centred over the top of the country. Below average heights are pushed up to the north of us. Jet streams going to our north as well. Then we've got the autumn of 1909. This one looks colder and more unsettled with above average heights in the North Atlantic and going up towards Greenland. Below average heights are kind of like to the south and southeast of the country. Jet stream going to be in that sort of position. So that one looks colder and more unsettled in 1909. The next autumn is 1910, again following May's central England temperature of 10.9 to 11.3. The autumn of 1910 looks quite unsettled across much of Central Europe, but for us we're blocking off the Atlantic, so perhaps not overly unsettled really. Certainly some of the eastern parts of the country could have some rain at times, but generally the Atlantic looks as though it's blocked off. So probably quite a cool but relatively dry autumn in 1910. Quite a long gap then through to 1927. The autumn of 1927 looking like this. It has some above average heights towards Greenland with below average heights over and to the east of the country. So probably quite an unsettled and probably quite cold autumn as well in 1927. A bit of a blocking pattern setting up. Of course, December 1927 was cold with a famous white Christmas, so maybe that blocking pattern was beginning to establish in the autumn of 1927. Not long to wait to the next year, 1928 coming up next. This one much more unsettled, Atlantic unleashed type autumn in 1928, bringing the westerlies through, so a wet and very unsettled autumn in 1928. Probably not all that cold, but certainly very unsettled with a bit of an Atlantic onslaught. And then 1929 shows up. So we have a run of Mays, interestingly, with a CET range of 10.9 to 11.3, 1927, 1928, and then 1929. This one also looking very unsettled this autumn. Another real Atlantic onslaught type autumn with the Atlantic unleashed as low pressure heads in from off the Atlantic. 1934 showing up next. This is quite an unsettled and also rather colder autumn, I think, in 1934. It has some above average heights out to the west. The jet stream looks like it's elongated as a trough within the 500 millibar flow. Quite cold and unsettled in 1934. 1942 is our next autumn. This one looking much quieter. So this one has a northerly displaced Azores high sitting just to the west, southwest of the country. Below average heights are up to the north. Jet streams up there. That's a relatively mild, dry but quiet autumn, I think, in 1942. Rather a benign autumn. Then we got the autumn of 1949, again following May CET of 10.9 to 11.3. We have below average heights with this autumn. Out to our west, we have some above average heights. Let's quickly change the colour. We have some above average heights over to the east. This is quite an unsettled but really warm autumn, especially warm in September of 1949. For a long time, September 1949 was just about the warmest September on record, I think, till 1999. beat it, but certainly September 1949 was a really, really warm month, a lot of southerly winds in that autumn. 1950 is cool, or even quite cold, and very unsettled, with its deep trough of below average heights over the top of the country. Jet streams doing something a little bit like that. So very wet autumn in 1950. Really, really unsettled month indeed. As too is the autumn of 1954. So this one again with a deep area of below average heights over and to the north of the country, above average heights to our south, and bringing in a very strong westerly flow like that. Again, that's another Atlantic unleashed type autumn in 1954. Really, really unsettled with that one. 1958 is very different. This is how the autumn of 1958 looks. So it has above average heights sitting up to our northeast. It's a much drier, a much quieter period, already perhaps beginning to set up the very dry and anticyclonic pattern that we have throughout 1959, really. Maybe that pattern was already starting to get going in the autumn of 1958. I think it does have a wet September in 1958, but after that, a lot of dry and quiet weather. 1961 is the next autumn, following a May CET range of 10.9 to 11.3. This one with below average heights over top of the country is just another very, very unsettled autumn indeed. Quite a wet autumn in 1961. The next autumn is 1966, so this one, again, it has that area of below average heights, kind of like through the UK, Western Europe, so it looks like it's very unsettled autumn. Above average heights out in the middle of the Atlantic, jet streams like that, so quite a cool but also very wet autumn. Of course, October 1966 has the terrible Aberfan disaster in Wales, where there was that awful landslip that went down over the school, and there were several fatalities, including children with that. So yeah, really wet autumn, and the weather did contribute to that disaster, of course, in October 1966. So yeah, very unsettled autumn, that one. 1969 is a much drier and much quieter autumn with above average heights again through the UK like that. We've got low pressure up to our north, but jet streams push north as well. So that's a much drier, much quieter autumn, very quiet autumn in 1969, containing a really warm October as well. 1974 is very unsettled, below average heights, low pressure over the UK and most of Western Europe. Again, the high pressure displaced into the middle of the Atlantic, jet streams like that. That's our last wet season. Autumn 1974 is the last wet season until the autumn of 1976. So after that deluge in the autumn of 1974, and even that was starting to dry out by November 1974, but that was the last unsettled and wet season until the autumn of 1976. Beyond the autumn of 74, so the Great Drought began. And then we've got the autumn of 1980. This was quite a cold autumn. It has above average heights out to the northwest. It has below average heights as a trough in over Scandinavia. A lot of northerly winds through the autumn of 1980. It does contain quite a dry and warm September, but after that things get much cooler and wetter in October, and then there's a cold November in 1980 with snow for bonfire night. Autumn 1981 is very unsettled, below average heights over top of the UK, bringing in westerlies. That's just a really unsettled, wet and disturbed autumn in 1981. September is very wet, for example, but also wet in October and November very regularly as well. 1985 is a much drier and much quieter autumn, with above average heights centred over the top of the country, low pressures penned back into the Atlantic, flow and jet goes something like that. Has a mainly warm and dry September, but by November we have an early bite of winter with a very cold November and some snowy easterly winds actually. November 1985. And then our last autumn, can you believe, for this Analogues package that had, that followed a May Central England temperature range of 10.9 to 11.3 is the autumn of 1986, with, again, the above average heights to the south and the below average heights up to the north. This is a more westerly type autumn. A lot of dry weather during the autumn of 1986, particularly in September and October, and it does have a notably cold September, interestingly. The last time we had a CET in September into the 11s was, I believe, September 1986, so dry and cold September in 86. Otherwise, the rest of the autumn was relatively mild, but again, quite a lot of dry weather on offer. So, putting all of that together, this is how the Septembers combined are looking when we have a CET range of 10.9 to 11.3. All of these Septembers combined do look quite unsettled, actually, with below average heights just over and to the west of the UK. Above average heights tend to be centred across more southern and eastern parts of Europe. The flow and the jets coming through like that. So, on average, these Septembers do look unsettled. Probably not cold, but wind is kind of like southwesterly generally with most of these Septembers. So just rather Atlantic driven, rather wet, rather unsettled, probably close to average temperatures. The Octobers look like that, so we tend to get below average heights more towards our north in October, with above average heights kind of like to the west-southwest of us. Jet stream coming through like that, so probably again quite Atlantic driven, but I would have thought there's a greater chance of being drier during the Octobers compared to the Septembers, because that high pressure is much closer to us during the Octobers following May to the CET range of 10.9 to 11.3. The Novembers look very unsettled though. Look at this, with below average heights over not just the UK but most of Western Europe. Above average heights tend to be pulled out into mid-Atlantic, so there is a suggestion of a mid-Atlantic ridge here as well. So not only unsettled but potentially quite cold with these Novembers. Maybe some early tastes of winter on offer with quite a few of those Novembers. Overall, the autumn's combined chart is looking like that, and it is unsettled, very much so, with a trough of below average heights through the country, mid-Atlantic ridge. So probably quite cool and unsettled overall with these autumns. Again, I think October probably holding the best prospect for something drier. But overall, it is an unsettled signal, particularly for September and for November too. Right, so that's done the CET data for May and the following autumns. We're going to pause the video there. I'm going to go get myself a little drink of water, and we'll meet back in around 2 seconds' time, and we'll go through the precipitation data. Do it all over again, but this time we'll look at precipitation. So I'm going to pause the video right there, and I'll see you in around 2 seconds' time. Alright, we're back and we're ready to resume the second autumn 2019 Analogues update from GWVeathers.com. So, the first part of the video, we was looking at May CET data. So, we looked at the May CET for 2019 and we went back and had a look at Parshes and had a similar CET range to May 2019, and then examine what the autumns were like that followed those Mays. Well, now we're going to look at May precipitation data as well, and have a look at the autumns that followed those Mays. So that's what we're going to get on with for you for the second part of this second autumn 2019 Analogues update. So let's get on with it for you right now. I'm going to begin by having a look at the total for the UK precipitation anomaly for May 2019. So it was quite an unusual month, actually. It was a very wet month across the northeastern parts of Scotland, and it was a much drier month across southern and southwestern parts of England, and also for much of Wales. Now, for the England and Wales precipitation for May 2019, we actually came out with a total of 45.8 millimetres. 45.8 millimetres was the England and Wales May 2019 precipitation total. And so that means that our range that we've got to be dealing with for this update is a May England and Wales precipitation range of 40 to 52 millimetres, and of course that places May 2019 slap bang in the middle of that range. So here we go again. This is how the autumn of 1863 looks. Again, within that England and Wales May precipitation range of 40 to 52 millimetres. The autumn of 1863, very unsettled, below average heights over to the west of the country, above average heights in the Atlantic, and also across central and eastern parts of Europe. And it means that for the jet stream, we're doing something a bit like that. So, probably not overly cool, actually. We're probably bringing up the wind from kind of like more of a southerly direction with that autumn. So, relatively mild, I would have thought, but it does look quite unsettled. The autumn of 1870 showing up next. This one is an Atlantic onslaught type autumn. Big area of low pressure coming off the Atlantic. Looks very, very unsettled. This, again, probably not particularly cold. It's very much a westerly autumn, but really unsettled. You can envisage it being very, very wet in the autumn of 1870. This looks a lot colder this autumn. It's 1875, again following May England and Wales precipitation of 40 to 52 millimetres. This one has a really strong blocking area of high pressure around Greenland and Iceland, with below average heights to the south and southeast of the country, so we'd be bringing in east-northeasterly winds. That could be a very wintry autumn in the autumn of 1875, quite a cold autumn with that one. The autumn of 1882 looks unsettled. Below average heights as a trough in the 500 millibar flow over the country. This one nowhere near as cold as the last autumn, because there's no particular northern block seen, although there is some high pressure to the north of Scandinavia, but generally that just looks a very unsettled and probably relatively mild autumn. As does 1883, again this one with below average heights through the country and bringing in those westerly winds rather like that. So the autumn of 1883, again Atlantic driven and very unsettled. 1893 showing up next. So this one has a trough of below average heights to the east of us and a ridge of above average heights out to our west. Quite a cool or even quite cold autumn, I think, in the autumn of 1893. 1900 is our next autumn, following a May England and Wales precipitation range of 40 to 52 millimetres. This one with above average heights out to the west of us, but also to some degree extending into the country. Below average heights are up to the north. Looks like jets will probably be pushed north as well. That could be a milder type autumn and also a drier autumn in 1900. Autumn 1909 is back again, so interestingly that one's showing up in both ranges, both Analogues packages. So it showed up in the Analogues package for the CET. It's also showing up in the Analogues package for May precipitation. So that's an important one, 1909. It's potentially one of the more important players if we was just looking at May data on its own. That one would show up as a leading sort of analogue with quite a cold type pattern, quite cool, quite cold and unsettled, you would have thought, in the autumn of 1909. Though the Atlantic is a bit blocked off, so perhaps not overly wet, but certainly quite a chilly autumn. 1909. 1914 is our next autumn. This one just looking rather unsettled. So it has some above average heights out there, to the northwest of the country, but overall quite a mild but unsettled autumn, 1914. 1921 is much more anticyclonic, with an area of above average heights over the top of the country, below average heights with the jet stream pushed up to our north. A lot of dry and fine weather on offer in the autumn of 1921. Not so for 1928, and this is another one that showed up within the CET Analogues package as well. So again, this one's a more important autumn, perhaps. Again, it was just looking at May data. This one, very, very unsettled Atlantic Unleashed type autumn in the autumn of 1928. Autumn of 1940 shows up next. So this one is unsettled with a big trough of below average heights navigating through not just the UK but much of Western Europe, along with the jet stream. Quite a cold and unsettled autumn in the autumn of 1940. Autumn of 1944 is our next autumn, following May, England and Wales precipitation of 40 to 52 millimetres. This one also looks quite unsettled, but nowhere near as unsettled as the autumn of 1940 or 1928 were. This one, quite chilly though, probably aligning the jet stream northwest-southeast, so quite a cool and relatively unsettled autumn. 1944. 1957, much more anticyclonic, this one with above average height centred not just over UK but across much of Central Europe as well. Below average heights up to the north. I believe it has a wet September in 1957, but then high pressure must have taken over as we went further into that particular autumn. Autumn of 1960, really, really unsettled. Look at this, deep trough at below average heights over to the west of the country, bring in those westerlies like that. Also has a bit of a northern blocking signal as well, so very unsettled autumn in 1960. The autumn of 1963 looks like this, quite an unsettled and relatively mild autumn, bringing in west-south-westerly winds. So I mean, the autumn of 1962 was quite cold, preceding the daddy of cold winters, which was 1962, 1963. Rather different for the autumn of 1963, though, before the winter of 1964. All looking a lot milder, no particular northern blocking signal there in the autumn of 1963. So quite unsettled, but a relatively mild autumn with that one. Autumn 1971 shows up next, this one with above average heights, kind of like over top of the country. So this is a very dry and mild autumn in the autumn of 1971. Very benign and quiet autumn indeed. The early 1970s was a very dull sort of period for weather, and that's indicative of the time, really. Just a dry, quiet and mild autumn in 1971. This is another one showing up within this Analogues package for England and Wales May precipitation, but it also showed up in the CET Analogues package for May. So again, this is one of the more important ones for this particular update. It's the autumn of 1974, again, which was a very, very unsettled autumn indeed. The last wet season, really, until the autumn of 1976. Autumn 1975 shows up next, and this is what I'm talking about. So starting with winter of 1974, 1975, and going right way through to the summer of 76, we have very, very dry seasons. This is indicative. Autumn 1975 has an area of above average height centred over to the east of the country. So just a lot of dry, quiet and quite warm weather with winds in from a southeasterly direction. There is a wet September actually in 1975. One of the few, only I think, wet months of that particular year is September 1975. Autumn 1977 comes up next, the autumn that I was born in. This one with below average heights up to the northwest, but some above average heights down to ourselves. Just a rather quiet autumn with this one, not particularly unsettled, but did have some wet weather at times. Just one of those sort of benign, forgettable seasons. The only memorable thing that happened in that autumn is that Cav was born. But anyway, we'll skip on to the autumn of 1978, and this is how autumn 1978 looks. Actually, a very dry and quiet autumn. Above average heights centred over the UK. It has below average heights up to the north. The jet streams push north as well. Absolutely no indication whatsoever in the autumn of 1978 of what's going to happen in the winter of 78, 79. It wasn't until the final week of November that it began to get much colder. But generally, that is just a really warm and dry and very quiet autumn in 1978. Autumn of 1982 is our next autumn, following May, England and Wales precipitation of 40 to 52 millimetres. This one much more unsettled, bit of an Atlantic unleashed type autumn in 1982. I think September's relatively dry, but then it gets unsettled. The autumn of 1987 showing up next. This one again quite an unsettled autumn, below average heights in the Atlantic, bringing the jet stream through like that. Of course, it contains the great storm of October 1987. October 1987 is actually a very wet month, containing the great storm. And then we've got the autumn of 1992. This one is an unsettled autumn as well, and quite a cold autumn, particularly so in October. October 1992 is cold. September 1992, very unsettled. Is rather drier and quieter in November of 1992. The autumn of 1995 is showing up next. This one is a much drier and quieter autumn with above average heights very close to the country. There is a wet September following on from the long hot summer of 1995. We do get a wet September, but then we get back to we get back to high pressure in October of 1995. And then November 1995 is quite unsettled, but also relatively mild. Autumn of 2001 comes up next. This is with above average heights over and to the west of the country. Jet stream doing something a bit like that. So September 2001 is a cool and quite unsettled month. Then we get through to October 2001, and that is a much warmer month. Very, very warm October in 2001. Not sure if it's still the warmest October on record. Probably it isn't, but for a while 2001 was the warmest October on record. And then we get November, which is a rather cooler type month as well. So quite an interesting autumn with a lot of contrast. 2001. Autumn 2004, also much more anticyclonic. You notice how these more recent autumns have a much more anticyclonic signal. That's quite interesting. With above average heights, again, tending to be more centred over and to the west of the country. So this one quite warm and dry in September. Very wet in October of 2004. And then November 2004, quite mild and fairly nondescript. 2005, also with quite a strong anticyclonic signal, this time more over and to the east of the country. So this one, again, very warm autumn in 2005. We're bringing up those southerly, sort of southeasterly type winds. So it's a very warm autumn, 2005. October 2005, very warm month. September 2005 is a very, very warm month indeed. Both quite unsettled. And then November's interesting because the first half is very mild, but the second half is much, much colder. We do actually get some snow in this very mild autumn, 2005. It happens in the second half of November, which did produce a very notable northerly outbreak. And then finally, the last autumn is 2018, again following May, England and Wales precipitation of 40 to 52 millimetres. And this one also with quite a strong anticyclonic signal, this time sort of over and to the east of the country with the below average heights out to the west. Jet stream is pushed to that sort of position. So although we have quite although they have quite a coolish September and relatively unsettled in September of 2018. October, of course, much warmer month. And November's interesting because that does have a go at bringing in a cold easterly wind, but it's one of those sort of failed easterlies that we get in November 2018. Overall, quite a warm autumn. It's interesting how those last few years much more anticyclonic, isn't it? From around 2001, we suddenly start getting much stronger anticyclonic signals. Well, maybe even from 1995, but certainly from 2001, much stronger anticyclonic signal. So you would say we're probably overdue actually to go back to a wetter side of things with autumns following this particular May England and Wales precipitation range. And this is how all of the Septembers combined are looking. Despite those final few years, actually it is an unsettled signal for September with below average heights over to the north of the country, so we bring the jet stream through like that. Looks relatively cool and wet. Signal for September. October, though, goes much more towards the drier side of things, with above average heights building over to the east of the country. Again, I'm not sure how much influence those final few years are having on these all years combined chart, but certainly October much more anticyclonic compared to September, bringing up the wind from a southerly southeast direction. So not only anticyclonic, but also potentially a lot warmer to average anyway in October. And then this anticyclonic signal looks like it continues into November as well, with above average heights just generally tending to be focused from the Atlantic through the UK. Low pressure tending to be to our north. Jet stream will be pushed to the north as well. So the all November's combined chart also strongly favouring anticyclonic conditions. Of course, it's a transitional season, so anticyclones in September are going to be relatively warm. But by the time you get through to November, anticyclones can be quite cold, even if we're on the warm side of the jet stream. Just depends if you start bringing cold air off the continent. But anyway, certainly September looks quite unsettled from this Analogues package. October and November, much more anticyclonic. Putting it all together, this is how all of the autumns combined are looking finally. So if you imagine that September is quite unsettled, but then October and November much more anticyclonic, then you see what's going on. We've got below average heights out to the northwest of the country, but we have this ridge over to the east. So actually you can't necessarily take that anomaly too seriously, because we do know that September does favour being a very unsettled month overall, but much more anticyclonic in October and November too. But that's how all of those autumns combined are coming out when we have a May England and Wales precipitation of 40 to 52 millimetres. And that's pretty much it for the second autumn 2019 Analogues update. We've talked for less than 40 minutes. I think that's pretty good going, actually. Pretty impressive to get through like 67 tabs in less than 40 minutes. Has been a bit of a marathon. Generally with these updates, I know winter updates tend to go on a lot longer, but for these updates I like to keep them around half an hour, so it's gone on a bit longer than I usually like. But I thought, why not have a marathon today? Why not do it? I'm sure we'll be back to around 25 to 30 minutes next week for the third update. Right, hope you found the video interesting. We shall place this video on the autumn updates and forecast page with a written summary going over everything that we discussed in the video later on today. I'll get that up for you this evening. Remember, this is all building up to the autumn forecast that will be released at the end of August. So that's going to be quite interesting, and we'll put all of the analogues together with the seasonal models, and we'll try and come up with a forecast for you for the autumn at the end of August. So each one of these updates important in their own terms, but also important in terms of the bigger picture, which is going to be building up the data for the autumn forecast. Right, so that's it for this video. We'll be back later on today with GWV Sunny Roundup. This video will be placed on the autumn updates forecast page with a written summary later on this evening. But at nearly 39 minutes, that's all for now, and thanks for watching.